Winfield,
Here.
Chairman Peter Yucaficio,
Here.
Supervisor Rex Scott,
Here.
Mr. Ted Maxwell,
Here.
Mayor Bob Tessel,
Here.
Chairman Ned Norris. I think he's connected.
He is
And-
connected, but
Okay.
we'll double check.
And Mayor Regina Romero.
Thank you. Item number 2 is the approval of May 27, 2021 meeting minutes.
Moved. Second.
All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next is the PAG Executive Director Performance Review. That will require us to go into executive session, and I'll entertain a motion to move to executive session.
Chairman, just a question. Is this supposed to be a both PAG RTA joint executive session?
No, I think it's just on PAG. That's how it was posted
Okay,
as PAG's Executive Director. I think it would have to be actually on the RTA.
okay. Just a question because procedurally I had read that the executive director's performance review was supposed to be both joint RTA PAG.
Thomas, I guess I'd punt over to you on for posting and
Mr. Chair, members of the regional council, I think it's just the PAG, not a joint, but I mean, it'd be the same.
Mr. Chair, I have a question to follow because I'm
Yes.
just trying to learn the structure of this. So as the executive director, and are there 2 separate contracts for this role? I mean, as reporting to a board in my day job, there's a lot of different hats that the position would take. So to me, if you're talking about a PAG performance review, it's really fulfilling all those hats. And through that PAG job, I believe Ms. McGeevy is also the chair of the RTA. I mean, not the chair, the executive director, effectively, of the RTA, or that title even exists.
Sure, if I may,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. Yes, so there's only one agreement. And if you recall, there's an MOU between PAG and RTA, and through that agreement, all the responsibilities of RTA are delegated to the PAG side of the business.
I'm not asking for us not to consider it,
Right.
but I'm just asking to, be within the spirit of what is requested by us. So I feel comfortable just moving forward, but I just wanted to make sure that we were not violating any written,
right,
performance
And
requests or
right. And I
anything
think
like that.
Mr. Chairman, members of the council, the contract is just with PAG. RTA doesn't have any employees, it's just PAG.
so we could have a discussion on kind of the full scope of the
But
duties.
most definitely, yes, the contract, covers the roles of the responsibilities of the executive director.
Right. Okay. I hope, does that clear it up a little bit?
I'm fine. I just want to make sure that we're not
Speaking
yeah.
out of turn. in
speaking out of
executive session,
turn
right.
or
I think we'll be good.
realize that we didn't do something procedural step correctly or
Right.
anything like
Thanks. I think we had a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by aye. Aye.
that. Aye.
So for the public, we'll be moving to an executive session and we'll return when we're completed. Oh, and I'll have first the council and Mr. Mahimi and our attorney. get started in just a minute. We're still waiting a couple of people to come back from bathroom break. Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to resume. Give a second. All in favor signify by aye. Aye. Okay, we're back to our regular meeting and Mr. Benavides.
Mr. Chairman, if the staff would like direction to assemble a performance evaluation tool for the executive director and provide additional information to the council.
Thank you. So moved. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much for a good, fruitful discussion. Moving forward to item number 4, approval of the FY 2022, FY 2023 overall work program. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Regional Council. I appreciate the opportunity to present on this item. As you may recall, we presented on the overall work program back in April. So some of this information is reviewed, and so some of this I will cover quickly at the end of time. So as you may recall, the OWP is a statement of work or scope of work that we know internally as the overall work program, and is required as the basis of an agreement that we have or a contract we have with ADOT. Each OWP is built on the previous OWP, and the same is true with this draft OWP, which was built on the adopted OWP from 2019. We wanted to cover some of the recent activities for the overall work program development. So on April 6th, we conducted a compliance review with our federal and state funding partners. We also presented, as I mentioned, to the Regional Council on April 22nd. Key OWP budget components have been included in the fiscal year 22 through 26 Transportation Improvement Program, which was approved by the Regional Council at the May 27th meeting. We also developed written responses to comments received from management committee members. On June 2nd, the Regional Council Executive Committee endorsed the overall work program, and then we held one-on-one meetings with city and county staff to discuss comments regarding the OWP and contracts with each entity. At the June 16th meeting, the Transportation Planning Committee discussed the draft overall work program. And at the June 24th meeting, the Management Committee discussed and reviewed the draft overall work program, and staff confirmed that all questions have been addressed. So as a federally required document for metropolitan planning organizations like PAG, the background and overview includes a discussion of PAG's roles and responsibilities, as well as our MPO and TMA designation, our federal planning factors and emphasis areas as well. When we start to get into the other content, we have various chapters, as you can see on your screen, transportation activities, integrated planning and smart region, etc. When we get to appendices, it includes an organizational chart, it includes budget tables, it includes a table that shows how our work elements coincide or align with the federal planning factors and emphasis areas, as well as an accomplishments and highlights section. For each chapter, we have various work elements. So for example, work element 40 is transportation activities. Each work element has a discussion of the purpose for that work element, funding sources, the projected outcomes and estimated completion dates, as well as goals and strategies to complete those, to accomplish those. In terms of updates to the adopted OWP elements, Different elements are discussed at various working groups and committees over the OWP implementation period. So for example, 102 distinct items related to the current and draft OWP were on various PAG and RTA committee agendas and discussed over the last 2 years. All proposed new additions or removed items are informed by these collective discussions as efforts as the proposed OWP was developed. And finally, the development of the proposed OWP is an administrative function. We talked about these in April, so I'll cover these very quickly. Table 1 in the OWP shows the anticipated revenues broken down by federal, state, and local sources. And I'm just going to show the fiscal year 22 tables, but we have the 23 if you'd like to see those as well. Table 2 shows the local share contributions for each of our member agencies, and those are not changing. It's part of the draft OWP. Table 3 is an expansion of Table 1, but breaks down the total revenue by program area and work element. Table 4 shows total expenditures by program area and category, broken down, as you can see by those various work elements. Table 5 shows the staff allocation by program area. So for fiscal year 22, at 55.5 FTEs are budgeted. And finally, Table 6. Table 6 shows capital equipment and consultants, including pass-through funding. It's a multi-page table, and it's really there to include items at $5,000 or greater in value. It's important to remember that the OWP is the basis for that work program agreement we have with ADOT for implementing OWP. And here's a screen capture of the previous agreement. And it's important to note that ADOT has the primary responsibility for administering Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration funds allocated to the MPO and ensuring that such funds are expended for eligible cost purposes and activities. And that's why PAG can't engage in extraneous matters or activities outside the scope of the agreement and the OWP. Finally, in terms of priorities for the next 2 fiscal years, making sure that we meet the commitments that are in the RTA plan. The RTA plan will sunset in 2026. As we develop the next transportation improvement program and long-range plan, we need to make sure we're meeting promises to the voters, as well as developing the next RTA plan is an important priority. The RMAP, that's the region's long-range transportation plan, the Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan. We anticipate adoption in 2024, but it's a multi-year effort involving many PAG committees as well as the public. So we'll be working on that over the next 2 years. Item 3, fulfilling any obligations due to contract or federal and or state mandates. And then finally, data and tools to support these efforts. Those are all the priorities that we've outlined in the OWP. So I want to say thank you to all the committees that have helped to inform this OWP. And with that, we're happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. It sounds like a lot of work's been done reaching out to the various communities and subcommittees and things. So it was a very thorough presentation. Any questions from Regional Council? If not, I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve. Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, we move to item number 5, which is the overview of composition of PAG Regional Council membership and voting entitlement. Mr. Mohini.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, if you recall, this was one of the topics that was discussed at the retreat at the request of Mayor Romero. We included this item on the agenda for discussion. Obviously, it's at your pleasure, and both Thomas and I are available to answer any questions you may have. But as you know, PAG and RTA are 2 separate entities. They have separate state authority. In case of the RTA, it's a legislative authority. In case of the PAG, it's a delegated authority by the state. And other than that, we're both here to answer any questions you may have and be happy to turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Would you like to start, Mayor Romero, since you asked this one?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we have this conversation, and I think it's just the beginning of a conversation for the regional council members as well as the RTA board. I think that what I'd like to present to my colleagues on the council, and I've talked about this before at our retreat in March, is that what I have the responsibility as the mayor of the city of Tucson, representing my council, as well as as the citizens of Tucson, is to ask for fairness, transparency, openness of the process, and the delivery of the program for RTA. Those are the goals that the city of Tucson has. That is what I want to make sure that I bring to the table and we have an open conversation about. The delivery of the existing programs for the city of Tucson is foundational to being able to continue to any possibility of an RTA next, as well as fairness and openness and transparency of the processes used for PAG RTA. What I would recommend that we do is that we have, presentations here, either in our next meeting or whenever our next meeting is. I think the next one scheduled is September and December, to be able to have a presentation of the different examples of membership and voting patterns in other organizations throughout Arizona. I know that MAG RTA in Maricopa County have different types of voting systems. Even in MAG, there's different voting systems. So what I would like to suggest is that we have a presentation either at our September or December meeting about the different possibilities of a fair process to represent our residents equitably in the city of Tucson and throughout the region. So that's what I would recommend, that we take our time. We have the benefit of time to do things right, and that we have the organization that practices that system of voting, for example, MAG or RTA MAG, to come and present to our council about how they do it, how do they reach consensus, how did they work this, what is their bylaws, legislation, how they make things happen. And it should be done by that party that practices that voting system versus our staff, so that we can ask questions and inform ourselves as a regional council. So that's what I would suggest that we do, to inform what possibilities we have for voting systems in Arizona that are already practiced in Arizona. I also noticed that our colleague on the Board of Supervisors, I'm pretty sure you've seen this, Supervisor Matt Hines, sent a memo and requested an item for the August 10th board meeting to talk about weighted voting. And he put his own idea, his own concept in front of his colleagues on the Board of Supervisors to support the possibility of proposed weighted voting structure. I'm not endorsing what he put, but it is a possibility. He could possibly come and present to us what he was thinking, but it would be great for a third party to come and talk to us about what systems they use and then take it from there.
Yeah, and I certainly have no problem having people come. I'd be a little uncomfortable from a fairness perspective to have anybody but Supervisor Scott representing the county, since he's our representative. Obviously, you could have we've had a chance to see what he sent or not, but I'd like to keep it between, at least for our region, our representative from the county.
And it's up to Supervisor Scott. I don't want to put him in a spot where he doesn't feel comfortable about either. So it's up to you all, but it would be great to hear as to what exactly, what type of structure and what are the whys as to how he came about on it. But most importantly, that MAG uses other voting structures, and I would love to hear from MAG about how they came about it, and how they put their voting structures to work and the bylaws, and then have an opportunity for us to ask questions.
Sure. And I, you know, I don't mind education. I know at least initially, my feeling would be when you're looking at an entity with probably, I think, 33 different municipalities and entities that are part of MAG, I think that's a very different look than the 9 of us when you go down that road. But I don't mind conversations. So, anybody else would like to weigh in, and probably be a lot of whether you can get MAG or whoever down in September as opposed to December. And, you know,
Mr. Chair, we'll be happy to provide the information and obviously invite them to present. It's pretty straightforward.
Right.
We'll be happy to answer any questions if they're not able to attend. We know their structure, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have related to their structure as well.
thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I would prefer a third party, those that actually practice the system, to come and talk to us about it.
Sure.
You know, the intricacies of their processes. And so I would much rather we have those organizations that practice it to be here in front of us, or virtually,
Right.
if they can't come,
Right.
to be able to explain to us and make
Yeah,
themselves
that's fine,
available.
but obviously it's up to them whether they either want to come or can come. But we would certainly I'm sure staff would certainly make that effort. Any other comments? Yes.
Reading the overview, thank you, Mr. Chair, reading the overview, our process, do I understand correctly, has been in place since 1970 or
Yes, sir. Since the inception of PAG.
51 years. Admittedly, I've served a relatively short time on this council, and we have even newer members of the council than myself. I think it would be helpful to get a historic perspective about our own process and the patterns, voting patterns, and so on and so forth. It seems to have, and I just have to speak for the town of Oro Valley, we have no concerns with the current process. It seems to have served our communities, our region well for 50 plus years. So I think I would appreciate, I guess, equal time to help.
The full story.
Yeah, to help, elevate all of our understanding.
Sure, be happy to. And again, I think we briefly touched on it last time. So the delegation of that authority through the state would be happy to add that information to the historical information as well.
Right. And what it would take to change something like that. Anybody else? Yes.
With respect to the proposal that Supervisor Hines has put on our agenda for August 10th, he just sent that item to all of us this morning. So I haven't had an opportunity to look at it in depth. I don't know if his intention, because it's listed as a discussion and possible action item, I don't know if his intention is just to explain his proposal to the rest of the board, or if his intention is to ask that that be the position of the board moving forward. I would certainly have no objection if he wanted to have him come before us and present his ideas in the interest of openness. I certainly intend to ask him some questions when we have our discussion next Tuesday about some of the statements that he has made about how the current arrangement has disadvantaged, I think his term was disempowered, the city of Tucson. And I think that would be an important part of the discussion as well, but I would certainly defer to Mayor Romero for those examples. But I do intend to ask Supervisor Hines about those examples when we talk next Tuesday.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
And Mr. Chair, it'd be great for, I know I did not receive it, was sent to all the members of RTA. I've not sent it to them. Supposedly, it's not just confirmed in my email, it's not there. So if
No, my understanding is it only went to the supervisors.
if as it becomes public knowledge.
Sure, we haven't received it. We haven't received it yet, but I will once we get it.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, it is attached to the Board of Supervisors agenda. And so anybody in this body and anybody in the public can get a copy of it.
Great, thanks. Any further discussion? Oh, yes.
And to be clear, again, I had not seen
I
this
know.
either. I had not seen this either myself. I just received this information at the same time that you did, Supervisor. And again, I don't, I'm not taking a position for or against. I had not seen it, so I don't know. I have similar questions in terms of what Supervisor Hines is suggesting. But I think it's only, I think it's only whatever you'd like and feel comfortable with. I'm good. We can certainly have, if you feel comfortable, Supervisor Hines come and explain what he was thinking and what's behind his proposal. I think that it's important to have this background material with plenty of time before we come back in September or December, where
Right.
whenever we have the ability to have MAG come and present what they do and how they do it. And I know that MAG has several different systems because they have a MAG, which is their planning organization,
Right.
and has the same history as PAG with one, I believe they have one jurisdiction, one vote. They also have different entities like the RTA where they have their weighted vote, which is different than the bylaws and how the PAG was created. The RTA was created through legislative action. And so we would have to take a look at that possibility. I've never really had an issue with PAG having a one jurisdiction, one vote. It is when you're taxing the citizens of our region with the RTA that I have questions about the fairness of how those funds are distributed and how the votes of different jurisdictions are counted.
Right.
So that should be clear also to our attorney and the executive director, that it is not just talking about the PAG, which was an organization that was created before I was born, but that it should be a difference, right? It should be, okay, this is how MAG does it, but this is how MAG RTA does it. And so we should be able to have that history at our next presentation.
Right, and I can respond to that if that helps at this time, but be happy to give you the additional information at the next meeting. So the RTA for the Maricopa County is under a separate legislation. RTA for Pima County is a different legislation. So there's a difference between
Correct.
those two.
And I knew that.
I didn't, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
As the only one that was actually an elected official when RTA started. Used to be Ramon Valdez with me, but Ramon lost his seat to Supervisor Hines. But when RTA was first proposed, weighted voting was proposed. And I really think it was 3 votes for the city, 2 for the county, and 1 for everybody else. And a few of us squawked. And both the city and the county had tried to pass RTA type ventures prior to that, with both of them failing. And in order to get, really it was Old Valley and Marana at the time, and to agree to fall into the process. Marana had a 0.5-cent transportation sales tax already, which we did away with to become part of the RTA. We said, hey, that's just not going to work, if we don't have some say at the board. And so the county and the city, both elected officials and senior management staff, agreed to just back off and go to the one entity, one vote. So this has been in front of us before. I might tell you, when the RTA passed, it passed by a larger percentage in Oil Valley and Marana than it did anywhere else. We like 80%. I mean, it was just crazy, and really helped push the RTA over the top to make it feasible. I understand where Mayor Romero has come from. Once we start getting into a weighted voting process, it really kind of muddies the waters. It could be a very contentious subject, and I don't want to go into more detail, but there's some history on kind of how the RTA, not PAG, but the RTA got started.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
I read with interest some of the supporting documents that were attached to a city council study session agenda when Mayor Romero and her colleagues were talking about the proposals that they wanted to present to all of us on behalf of the city. And one of those documents noted that the overwhelming or majority of MPOs in the United States do not have weighted voting. So I am always going to be interested in learning more and hearing more from people who have different structures. But I certainly also appreciate some amplification of that statistic as to why the majority of MPOs in the United States do not employ weighted voting.
Thank you. Staff, take note of that.
Of course, yes.
Thanks. Any other comments? Having no more further business, we're adjourned.
Let's call to order the RTA board meeting for August 5th, 2021. Moving on to agenda item number 2, approval of May 27th, 2021 meeting minute.
So moved.
Second. Everyone for approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 3, RTA plan update, statutory mandates and implementation requirements. Mr. Bean?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. I'm going to give a very quick high-level overview of where we are with the construction projects going on. And then we'll turn the meeting over to, or this presentation over to Mr. Benavides to talk about the funding requirements. In terms of current projects underway, Ruth Rock Road is now open to traffic going over top of it. ADOT expects to complete the project over the course of by the end of the calendar year, and we'll be opening up ramps as they complete projects. So that is moving along. Oracle Road, that project is now underway. That's largely a maintenance and modernization project of the ADOT's. However, there is a component of it that is part of the McGee project. It was a deferred intersection improvement. And so that project is going to be getting underway. If you recall, we did an intergovernmental agreement with ADOT recently for $600,000 to fund that. The Downtown Links project is underway, largely in drainage work at the moment. Broadway Boulevard also under construction. That is experiencing some delivery delays, largely due to unforeseen utility complications. Right now, we're looking at sometime after the first of the year that project will be completed. Houghton Road between Marianne Cleveland Boulevard and Valencia Road, also under construction right now. That one is moving along well. We expect that to be completed around the end of the calendar year. Substantially completed, probably functionally operational prior to that. Another project that has just started is the Wilmot and Saurita Road intersection. That's another one of these deferred intersection improvements. The county went out with the project. Wanted to build the intersection, was fearful that the costs would exceed what was available, so they bid the main line. Realized that the project came in substantially under their estimate, so they were able to go out with a second phase. So that is currently underway. That's improving the intersection itself, both the turning capacity and movements there, as well as drainage improvements. Up next, projects that will be starting soon. First is the City of Tucson's 22nd Street project. They've got the contractor services or construction management team selected, and they are moving through the selection process for the construction managers at risk. We hope to see them underway and breaking ground sometime around the end of the calendar year. Also, following that, we are starting to see utility relocations begin.
later this year on Silver Bell Road, the piece between Goree and El Camino del Cerro, with construction to start next summer. And construction is currently underway with utility relocations and right-of-way on Grant Road phases 3 and 4. That project also will get underway with full construction next summer. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Mr. Benavides. And okay, now where we want to start?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
A little bit about the administrative code that the RTA board adopted in 2006 pursuant to ARS 485305. The code limits reimbursable items for regionally funded projects to those costs associated with planning, design, right-of-way, acquisition, and associated costs, including relocation, construction, design concept reports, planning and related studies, like your environmental studies, et cetera. Safety, intersection improvements, bicycle and pedestrian improvements in accordance with the selection criteria and corridor priorities established by the RTA board. Small business assistance, projects or components thereof directly related to transportation capacity and safety improvements, including intelligent transportation systems, traffic control devices, work zone and traffic management, and lighting. Transit stops and pullouts, as well as queue jumper lanes for express buses, et cetera. Bicycle pedestrian facilities where integral to the roadway, including sidewalks separated from curbs and multi-use paths. Also utility relocations, but only where required by law or where there are prior legal rights. Drainage improvements limited to those required for the roadway project, which do not exceed local jurisdictional practices. Landscaped medians, shoulders, and other roadway improvements within reasonable limits and generally not exceeding typical practice for the local jurisdiction. Project landscaping should not exceed 4% of the construction cost. Access management, asphalt, including rubberized and concrete paving. Staff time directly attributable to the project as defined in the project agreement with the jurisdiction. Noise walls necessary to meet local standards and federal standards, required environmental and cultural resources mitigation, public art not to exceed 1% of the construction cost, public outreach expenses provided they're reasonable and don't include unnecessary items, critical wildlife linkages and trails. Historically, some costs have been disallowed where optional items have been added beyond the scope of the project. Funding caps have been exceeded, such as art and landscaping, utility relocation expenses that were not due to prior legal rights, project elements that are the responsibility of another jurisdiction. Reimbursements will not be made for redesign due to change of project scope or design concept. Finally, additional costs due to modifications to the scope of an RTA project are acceptable if the modifications do not diminish the project's functionality and the project lead agency provides the funding for additional elements. All of these rules that were adopted by the board, they're all consistent with the RTA's fiduciary duty to manage the public tax dollars with the highest standard of care and deliver the projects on budget to the public as promised. Be happy to take any questions.
I had questions for Jim, but not necessarily for that the latest presentation.
Mr. Chair, I got one question for Benavides on what he was briefed. There was one line, it's minutia, but it is a difference in word. You were talking about the 4% on exceeding the cost of 4% on landscape. You used the word should. The slide said will.
I think I changed it. I think I said should. I think
Yeah, you did. You said should, and the slide said will. So I guess the question is which one? Which one is it?
Let me
The
look.
should and will are two different. Will not,
Right now,
should not,
where did I
and
say?
will not.
Oh, my 4% will not exceed 4% of the construction cost. That's part of the code.
Right, so the will, it's a will. You said should. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a good point. I changed it. That was significant, but I just didn't mean to change it.
Yeah, we're going to have a question as well.
Jim, I appreciate the update on projects and so bus pullouts, new sidewalks, new bike lanes, they all just seem to be well below our targets. Are we in comparison, say, to intersections and pedestrians where we're very close to meeting the target's goals, or will bus pullouts, sidewalks, or are we going to meet those targets? Or is there a reason that we're so far under the projected targets? Is it a funding?
No, actually, one of the things that Mr. Chair, Mayor Winfield, with respect to the sidewalks and the bike lanes and the bus pullouts. Bus pullouts, in the number that we've provided, those include or will include those that are constructed along the main line of road improvement. So as we build, say, Grant Road, we'll add the bus pullouts associated with that. And as we do these mainline improvements, for instance, I believe there are 11 bus pullouts on Broadway. These kinds of things will be additive as those projects are completed. If there is one area that we're weak in, it's probably the bike lane, and that's something that we'll need to take a look at as we go forward.
And then there's not a similar, but the 17 roadway corridors completed, is that out of, and this may just be a reflection, I just don't know, is that out of 34 roadways, or is that out of, is there a number?
Oh, I'm sorry. There are 35 roadway element projects. Okay. Yeah, that is one of them. Although we have multiple phases of some projects, for instance, I think Houghton Road.
So 17 are completed. Are we on target as well for completing the other 18? Or again, is that a funding issue that we won't meet that target or goal of?
What I
those
tell you
corridors?
is there is a lot of partial work that's done on many corridors. For instance, Houghton Road, we have 11 phases of that. That's not something that we've marked as complete yet, but we have built a number of elements of it. Broadway is a single phase. Downtown Links, we haven't, we're not showing that as complete, although we've built 2 phases of that project already. The first being a drainage section, the second being the St. Mary's section. So there are multiple phases on these. So it's not proportionate, if you will, to say that we're 17 of 35, so we're halfway at 45 or at 75% of the duration. We've actually been making progress on many projects. But are there projects that have not yet commenced design? Yes.
Yeah.
There are some projects that have not commenced design.
Thank you.
Chairman, sorry. I was looking at the PAG chairman. So sorry, Chairman.
He's got much more hair than I do.
So just for the record and to correct the record, what we know in terms of most MPOs around the country is that most MPOs have voting by representative voting based on population. So I just wanted to make sure that I corrected the record because Diana Lacon, who provided that information that you quoted, Supervisor Scott, it really wanted to make sure that that most MPOs throughout the country have representation based voting based on population. We could do the research and our staff can help us present the appropriate information. That's just to correct the record. On this particular item, what concerns me, and I've talked about this publicly with this group, is that for the city of Tucson, I've said this before and I'll say it again, for the city of Tucson, what's most important is that we have fairness in this body, that there's openness and transparency in the process, and that we have the fair and equitable delivery of the program, of what we promised the voters of our region. And so what is happening with the city of Tucson is that many of the remaining RTA projects cannot be delivered based on the ballot amounts that were approved by the voters. This is not because we wanted to. This is because there are increased costs above the ballot amount due to inflation and considerable right-of-way acquisition. What we want to have a conversation on here is that how do we present those projects so that we can get those projects funded and delivered to the residents of the city of Tucson, so that the what the voters voted on will be fair and equitable, and that we can deliver the program that we promised. That's the main question. I don't know exactly what your presentation, Mr. Benavides, is intended for, but I want to make sure that we at least bring this this conversation to the table, because that is what has been concerning the city of Tucson, that we have more than almost $300 million of deficit in RTA projects because of construction inflation. And so how do we present those projects, and how do we make sure that they're funded to a level where the city of Tucson can deliver the program that we promised the voters?
Sure. Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, at the last meeting, RTA board approved the budget for fiscal year 22. As part of that approval process, we have roughly $30 million of additional revenue in fiscal year 22 to make it available for supplementing projects that are going to be under construction in 22. So that's the approach we're taking on an annual basis as we look at our actual revenue coming in. As we adopt the budget, we identify additional funds that are going to be available to supplement projects, and then we're able to go through a review process. And one of the reasons we had this conversation was because we had recently put out a request for projects that need additional supplemental funding, and we received a request for additional supplemental funding. We will go through this process and then bring back a recommendation on how we're going to provide additional supplemental funds for those projects to be completed. But we can only do that one fiscal year at a time, as we have a much better handle on the revenue and cash flow. We're in a really good financial position right now. It's actually one of the items later on the agenda that will tell you about how we're performing really well with our collections and the revenue. So we anticipate to be able to close some of that gap. And that can really be determined on an annual basis as we close that gap. You're correct. In some cases, we may not be able to close the gap, but there's got to be other solutions that we can discuss and figure out how we address those projects.
How do you define, that additional funds, how do you put them out based on
We just
projects of regional significance, based on projects that are heavily underfunded? What's the process that you use?
So these are just for RTA funds.
Mhm.
The RTA funds, we put out a request for any eligible RTA project that is currently in design or under construction, or can be constructed in 22 or 23. And the requests that we got back were for projects that are most likely under construction in 22 or 23 for that $30 million. And then we'll come back to the board with a recommendation on how we spend those dollars above and beyond the ballot amount to supplement those projects.
Can the PAG Council RTA board have a conversation about a complete list of all the projects that do not have enough funding? In other words, can we have that conversation here and be presented with a list of all of the projects in all of the jurisdictions that are underfunded and that are short based on what our requests for proposals
Of course.
back with? So can we have a comprehensive conversation about those projects throughout the region that are underfunded and don't have enough money to move forward?
So the understanding of the amount of dollars that are going to be needed to supplement the projects, it's at the planning level. How we're addressing it is at the design and construction level. So by the time you have full design on a project, then you can have a better understanding on what the bids are going to be and try to meet that need at that time. So that's the approach we're taking currently, but we could look at the planning numbers as well. But to address it, really, you can only address it on an annual basis.
Because it seems to me that that the board is receiving its pieces of information of what the bottom line is. So the bottom line for us, we have a list. We can provide you all a list of all of the RTA projects in the city of Tucson that are underfunded based on property acquisition and construction inflation. We can, I mean, it's almost $300 million. So I just would love for the board to be able to have the complete picture and start making decisions together as a board as to how we're going to approach that unfunded liability that you can call. So does the city of Tucson have to request from the chair a presentation? Do they request formally so that we can be presented the entire picture and all of us can start talking about how we correct this concern?
So, Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, as part of the long-range plan, we updated our cost estimates for the long-range plan. We had that conversation last fall, and we have a good planning level numbers. We'll be happy to bring those numbers to the table at the planning level. I guess what I'm suggesting is that that's not going to help us get to a resolution on an annual basis, having the revenue numbers and actual design numbers. That's really where you're going to be able to get to a resolution on how you can meet those expectations.
I think we're talking apples and oranges. I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. What I'm saying is that we, the board of the RTA, should have a comprehensive conversation about what our unfunded projects are. And I'm only, talking what I know in terms of the city of Tucson and our projects, but I can imagine that there are other projects that my colleagues on the board might be very concerned about that don't have enough funding, including Pima County, I know that. So what's the process?
Yeah,
Does the city of Tucson request from the
No,
chair
we'll
of
be
the
happy to do
RTA
that.
the conversation about having a comprehensive discussion of what the unfunded liability is
For
for
Mr. Chair,
for the entire region, not just the city of
yes,
Tucson?
so again, the same information we had on the long-range plan that was adopted by the regional council, we can bring that information back to you. And at the same time, talk about how we're going to fund the projects in fiscal year 22, with our understanding that future fiscal years, we would have to come back and address those at a later time.
Yes, and have an inclusive, comprehensive conversation about unfunded projects or that we don't have.
So I think I understand what you're looking for. Yes.
So
Yes.
we can formally request it. We can put a
No,
request
I
in
think
writing.
I'm recommending that would be a good exercise, and we'll do that at a future meeting. I guess, again, my recommendation is to look at it in the perspective of what's RTA's responsibility, and we'll bring that information to you. At this point, we don't have that breakdown. That breakdown is really only available when you have a design and you have a cost estimate. That's a design level cost estimate. And we'll talk about that at that time.
Well, and we could also formalize the request in writing so that the chairman understands exactly what, yes, will you say yes? And what I'd like to make sure that we see, because I think that it would be very appropriate as we're talking about CACs and RTA next, and that we understand what is left in terms of unfunded liability for the projects throughout the region that we need to talk about as a board before we get too ahead of ourselves, continuing on the road of RTA next. Because for the city of Tucson and my colleagues on the council, it is fundamental. The delivery of the program is a fundamental decision point for the city of Tucson to be able to continue supporting even the conversation of an RTA next. So I'll do that, Chairman, on behalf of the city of Tucson requested. And I think it would be a really good opportunity for my colleagues in other jurisdictions to be able to also put in their projects where they have concern of unfunded projects for your jurisdiction. So I'll do that more formally in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair, Executive Director, I do have one question. Obviously, infrastructure is getting a lot of attention at the national level, through two ways. In the current appropriations process back in Congress, they're putting in member-directed projects. Some people call them earmarks, but they're calling them member-directed projects now. So I guess my question is, have we looked at the possibility of going to our either for this year's, obviously it's too late for this year's budget, but for 23, 24 or beyond, to engage with our members of Congress to try to get some funding towards projects that we already know of the shortfall, that we're going to have shortfalls on the RTA? Or do you believe that from what you understand, Executive Director, on the current infrastructure program and what the monies that may be coming in the future, will we have access to any of that? I know this year's, for example, member-directed projects have several. It's like the tier 2 for the Sonoran corridor, or at least a portion of it was put in there. So historically, I think we tend to lean forward and think of new projects that we don't have funding for. But have we considered engaging on that front to get funding for projects we already have on the books, but we don't have enough for?
Mr. Chair, General Maxwell, historically, individual entities would put their request in for earmarks, and that's been the practice, but be happy to help coordinate that conversation and have this body weigh in on how we can make those requests on existing projects. That would probably be a good conversation to have.
I think it'd be a great way. We may not be a formal governmental agency, but we are in some ways. And I think for the RTA to work with the jurisdictions that are represented around this table to then either make sure that they put them in or we put in, but more importantly, then you can get the business community activated behind it to also reach out to members of Congress and really push for those. Because for the next several years, and my predecessor, Mike Hammond, has told me he has no money when he's involved. All of a sudden, I get his position and we got funding coming in. But the fact of the matter is, if we're not proactive on it, it's going to go to other either new projects or things that aren't in, and it may be an opportunity to make up for some of the shortfalls, whether they've been brought on by the increasing costs or the recession of 2008. It's just an opportunity.
No, that's a great suggestion. We'll be happy to coordinate that conversation. And I'm sure you've been following some of that. Some of the entities have already put their request in. So you're right. It's too late for this car round, but for the future.
Chair, just to update you, I know when Senator Kelly was in the area, he invited all the municipalities to meet with him, and they gave him, I was out of town, unfortunately, but one of my council members went. So I know there's active discussions, with our local elected, national elected leaders to help. So if we had an unfunded or, project down in Salarita, that would have been something we would have placed in front of him. So we had to really, in that case, add new ones because ours were completed already. But I know those are active discussions within the individual municipalities.
Mr. Chair, it's definitely an option because those funds haven't been on the table to talk about. Right now, on the national level, they are. And I think it's an opportunity.
And if I may add to that, so in addition to earmarks, we hope and anticipate there's going to be additional federal dollars that are going to come to the region. I don't have a good estimate at this point, but it looks very optimistic that there would be additional regional funds.
Thank you.
I think as part, if I may, Mr. Chair, as part of the conversation, it's a great point. I don't know what to call you, Regional Council Member Maxwell, more formally. It's important to also have a comprehensive discussion of the money that we're already putting in the RTA program, right? Because the monies that we're already putting in the RTA program are not just RTA dollars, but impact fees as well. We're already using impact fees to the fullest extent to make these RTA projects pencil out. And we're also using a lot of federal funds that come to the PAG to supplement those unfunded liabilities that we have. So we are already using any money available that is being produced within the city of Tucson and in our region to be able to fill those gaps. And so being able to describe all the other funds like impact fees and federal funds that are coming through PAG and RTA dollars. And then that's why I think it's so important to have a comprehensive conversation about this so that we can try and find solutions for the projects that we have in front of us, because we have I can speak for the city of Tucson, we have been using impact fees that are being produced in our city for RTA projects when there are other needs, that we really do have those needs to use those impact fees for, like local roads and residential roads. So we've got to approach this problem of unfunded liability as a group of electeds representing our regions, and try and figure out how do we use those, because we've had good years, how do we use those dollars to fulfill what was promised to the voters. But great point.
Any other questions? Comments? No? Then let's moving on to item number 4. RTA next development process and citizens advisories committee role.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the RTA board. I'm going to continue on or go beyond what we had talked about at our April study session. Remind you, begin with that, as we talk about the RTA next plan, it's still a blank slate. We don't have any preordained project lists. All project requests will be subjected to the same process. And there's no, although we've talked about commitments to various categorical elements, no commitment has been made to date. What I'm going to do next is talk a little bit about the framework that was developed. Can you advance the slide, please?
So Jim, if you don't mind, before we get to the framework, allow me to make a few comments, and then I would like Supervisor Scott to make a few comments, but this is only here as an outline for a conversation. So are you ready for the framework yet or not yet?
I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do.
What's the next slide?
I think the next slide was to talk about future plan components and that we do need to identify elements.
Good.
We need to update our revenue forecast. In light of the changing economy that we're in right now, I think it's appropriate. We actually have already entered into a contract with the Eller Business Research Center on that. So as we do every 3 years, at least now we're past at least the largest period of uncertainty relating to the pandemic. Still a lot of uncertainty out there, but we're getting some better data moving forward. The projects in the plan need to address measurable goals. As we heard from the audit team 5 years ago, and they're back with us now, we are needing to look at our projects in terms of measurable goals, safety, air quality, congestion, and so forth. And at the end of the day, whatever we present is going to have to be something that will appeal to the majority of voters. So those are really the things that we need to focus on here. Advanced, thanks. This is a listing of the goals that have been there. So
yeah, if you don't mind, thank you. I just want to introduce the topic and then obviously open it up for conversation. So this was another item we discussed at the retreat and at the request of Supervisor Scott. We want to get a little bit more in depth into the framework, but at the same time, Supervisor Scott recommended a composition that is geographic composition for the CAC. So we want to have an opportunity for having that conversation as well. So if you don't mind, Supervisor Scott, why don't we have you maybe start with your proposal and then we'll dive back into the framework
Surely.
And the guidelines.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mogimi and Mr. DeGrood. As we all know, the current RTA plan is going to expire in 2026. And if we do not have an RTA next plan put before the voters that can move in and replace the current plan in 2026, I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that that could be catastrophic for our region. There are current transportation needs that are funded by RTA revenues. Certainly there will be future transportation needs funded by RTA revenues. Moreover, as everybody in this room knows, a previous RTA board got permission from the legislature to ask the voters either to approve the renewal of the existing half-cent sales tax or any amount up to a full penny. None of us can generate that kind of revenue alone. It's another example of what we were able to achieve collaboratively. The CAC, the Citizens Advisory Committee, has been working for the past 3 years on coming up with an RTA plan. RTA next plan. The previous board had a sunset on the work of that CAC, and we moved in at our last meeting in May to reappoint the 23 people who wanted to continue their work. They have up until 2024, 3 years from now, to get their work done. But one of the other things that we talked about is the need to appoint an additional 12 members so that we can get the CAC up to its full complement of 35. There were 12 members of the CAC who did not want to continue, so we need to appoint an additional 12 members. My proposal, and it's attached to this item, is that the final roster of the CAC have 18 members from the city of Tucson, 8 members from the unincorporated areas of Pima County, 2 members each from Marana, Sabarita, and Oro Valley, and 1 member each from the Pasquayaki tribe, Tohono O'odham Nation, and South Tucson. That would bring us up to the full complement of 35. This would have a CAC that is geographically proportional based on population. As we can see here, the framework, and it's also attached to the agenda item, the framework that was adopted by the previous CAC after a long process that I imagine Mr. DeGroot is going to talk to us about. It was adopted in January of 2020. I feel that that framework not only gives guidance to the CAC in terms of how to conduct their work, but also provides reassurance to each of us that the concerns of our jurisdictions will be equally represented. The CAC needs resources and support to move forward. This proposal, if adopted, will help them to move forward. And at this point, I would turn it back to all of you and certainly welcome any comments from my colleagues.
Mr. Chair? I did review that and, would be in full support. And actually, additionally to that, alls I've ever wanted on the CAC are good people. So if for some reason we couldn't find 2 people from Sahuarita, I'm perfectly fine, of the chair of the CAC, or, I'd rather have the full complement. I don't really care where they come from necessarily, but I appreciate that because I think we only had 1 before, so now we have 2. That would be okay. But I never, until this recent discussion, I never even knew, honestly, where these people came from, or did I care? If it was well balanced on, understanding and needs and those types of things, and people that want to be involved, in the process, I'd rather have another person from an unincorporated that will show up than have someone from Sahuarita that doesn't show up. I'm not saying they wouldn't, but I appreciate, the work that you did to do that. And my goal always was to have involved members of the CAC that are studious, but I appreciate you looking at trying to full complement from all of our regions.
I think the supervisor's suggestion makes this a political committee and not just a citizens advisory committee. Do we have the breakdown of the 23 that asked for reappointment? Because I think there's 3 from Marana, so we'll have to kick one of them off in order to make the thing work, even if they've been serving well for years. I think we're getting to the point we're making CAC a political committee. I don't know how you came up with 18 of 35, which is just over half. You know, and we haven't had the decade census yet. We don't even know for sure where everything is. It really, then we start picking people. Who's going to pick the people from those entities? Am I going to pick the two people, my council and I, that represent Marana? If that's the case, it becomes a political committee. Because you have me as an elected official with my council appointing two people. And I have a real issue with that. And I think you're really getting into the weeds. And I think you're a pretty smart guy, and you and I have done some touring together, but I just don't think this works at all. And I think we get to the point, you know, if we, you know, if Tucson can choose the 18, if they don't like some of the ones that are on there, can they kick from Tucson? Can they kick them off and put other people from Tucson? How are you going to pick these people? When you start becoming that nailed down, how are you really going to pick them? How are you going to pick them? How do we know what's on there now? What if there is 3 from Marana, which I think there is? And I didn't know, just like Mayor Murphy, I didn't know if we had any until about a year and a half ago when the subject started coming up. I got a printout from PAG and the RTA of where everybody lived. And I actually had to go through there and check streets and everything like that to see whoever was. I knew one of our people that was on there. The other 2 I didn't even know. And I think if you start narrowing it down like that to where each entity starts picking the people, there's your weighted voting. Because the CAC is the body that suggests the subjects, the projects that we will build in RTA next. And I think if something like that goes through, you kill this RTA program. I'm being open and honest with you.
Mr. Chairman. First of all, the 23 people who are currently on the CAC, we reappointed them, they would continue. They break down like this. There were 11 representatives of the city of Tucson, 7 representatives from unincorporated Pima County, 2 from Marana, 2 from Oro Valley, 1 from Sahuarita, and there were no representatives from the Pasquayaqui tribe, Tohono O'odham Nation, and South Tucson. The process, I'm not suggesting any process for appointing the additional 12 members that would be any different than the process that was followed the last time, which is that people would apply and then their names would be recommended to the RTA board for appointment.
Who chooses the recommendation?
Who did it last time?
Mr. Chair, if I may help
Please.
out. So last time, thank you for that summary. So last time it was a region-wide advertisement, open application process. We received roughly 70 applications. And of the 70, the 2 chairs at the time, the PAG chair and the RTA chair, were instrumental in reviewing those applications. And the recommendation came from the 2 chairs to the RTA board for 35 appointments. At the time when the 35 appointments were made, we had a really good geographic balance. So we kind of had a similar balance with the original 35. And as Supervisor Scott just mentioned, out of the 35, the 23 that are remaining, that's the breakdown that we have currently. So unfortunately, there were a few people that were representing an area that decided not to continue. So that's why we're down to the 23 number.
And I recognize that the original 35 were not appointed based on geography, but one of the prevailing topics of conversation since I joined this group at the beginning of the year has been the concern that each jurisdiction have their needs represented on their needs and concerns represented on the CAC, but that the framework would guide the entire CAC to make sure that decisions were made on a regional basis. So what I'm trying to do, Mayor Honey and my other colleagues, is strike some kind of compromise so that the CAC can move forward and develop an RTA next plan so that we do not miss out not only on the current funding that we are reliant upon, but the future funding that we are counting on to meet our transportation needs. It is an attempt at a compromise and to move us forward.
You know, the CAC, I do have one pretty good friend on the CAC that I've talked to quite a bit about this. The CAC is supposed to pick suggested projects that all of us, but one, have submitted so far. And they pick them on their merit. You know, building an Ina Road interchange in Marana may benefit the city of Tucson more than me. Getting people to the freeway that come from just outside our boundaries. We have a common border right there. You know, when you start picking people by entity instead of by the ability to serve and what they have to offer, I think becomes a real problem. You know, I had somebody call me and was really mad about how things were going, and they said people should be chose by their ethnic heritage, or by their gender, or by whatever. We're never going to make this thing perfect. But if we start splitting it up like that, I think it just starts the domino effect to move to hurt us.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Supervisor Scott, one, appreciate the effort to throw out something that to get the conversation started. But I really think this is just the beginning of the conversation. We do have to replace 12 people on that Citizens Advisory Committee eventually. I was one of those 12. So when I took this position on the board, I resigned from the Citizens Advisory Committee. So as part of the initial process that went through in it, you know, in my opinion, it was a fair and it was a good process. Now that said, I don't think we have to stick to that process. I tend to agree with you, Mayor Honey. I don't think going hard and fast is good here. But what I think is important is let's talk to the folks that are involved in that process. I would strongly reach out, recommend we talk to their chair, Tom McGovern, who's the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, because he can look around his table and tell you what he has representation for and what he doesn't. Because what we ultimately want coming out of the Citizens Advisory Committee is as strong of a possible plan that when we take it out to the citizens and start presenting that plan to them, that most people will come in and going, that's great. Sure, there's going to be some people that are going to want to make some changes. They're going to want to say, hey, maybe there's not enough transit, there's not enough, bicycle considerations or consideration for pedestrians. But those folks that are in the Citizens Advisory Committee, and a lot of them have been through this process before, may know what they need. So I don't think we have to stick and go with somebody that's all broad on, infrastructure, knows it all, especially hardcore infrastructure. But are there enough folks that can speak to these guiding principles on that committee effectively? Do we have enough folks that are representing some of those other areas of concern? You know, the bicycles, the walks, some of the transit. 29% of the last plan was transit. So we need to have those voices at the table when they're building the plan. Remember, ultimately, we are the ones that put the final vote of approval on the plan. But in its process, the Citizens Advisory Committee will bring such a solid plan forward that yes, there will be community input. Yes, there will be changes made, but we hope they're not dramatic changes. So I think this is just the beginning of the conversation. I talked to Supervisor Scott right when he came in and said, love the idea that you threw something there. I'm not sure I'm ready to go there because I do think there's problems if we go that hard, but I do think we need to open up the conversation. We need to bring some of the people who are involved in the process and say, what is the best way to identify the 12 spots? This is one chance we've got to put 12 folks on there that we think will be additive to the process and not create more problems. And I'll tell you, when you do it the way we did it the first time, there were a couple votes in those. I know the executive director probably will agree. There were a couple votes in the first 2 days of people that were going to throw down hard and fast and say, this is what's going to happen in the RTA. And we're going, no, this is too early in the process. We have to get out there. And ultimately, The only people that we really are trying to impress with this process, I think we all agree that this kind of investment in infrastructure is critical. And if we don't get reauthorization to RTA, this region is going to be in trouble when it comes to our infrastructure, is the voters, because that's who's going to make the determination. So we've got to figure out how we can get their voices at this table. So I suggest we open up the conversation. We can have more of it today, but I don't think we need to jump to any conclusion on who those 12 or what the process we're going to use to select them is yet. We've got time.
Gentlemen,
I appreciate the perspective of, I don't like, I like to be
Okay.
formal. I like to be formal. So, board member Maxwell, because he was in the CAC. You know, he really lived the meetings. He knows what the gaps in terms of representation were there. And I really like the idea of continuing this conversation. And then I also highly appreciate putting your thoughts on paper, Supervisor Scott. I really appreciate you trying to build that consensus amongst amongst the board members in the RTA. I agree that we need to continue the dialogue. I would say that maybe the chair, vice chair of the RTA board and the chair and vice chair of the CAC could help create that committee that will help choose the next 12. I also like the process that that had been used before, right? To do an open call to whomever is interested in serving that they serve. But I also think that it's important for the CAC to have that diversity of voices and thought, the diversity of age, of gender, of geographic representation, of representation of people that live in lower income communities and communities of color. I don't think that's a bad word, Mayor Hooney. I think that diversity is a good thing. Diversity makes things that much better when you sit down and everyone brings their experience to the table. It should make it better, right? There's going to be differences and sometimes lack of understanding because of the background experiences that we have. But being able to have diversity at the table of the CAC will make the process so much better. Because at the end of the day, if we are going to get to an RTA next, that all of us in this table want to hold hands and continue moving forward together as, then that CAC is going to play a very, very important piece of the needs in transportation, transit, and mobility that we have to make sure that we're thinking forward, right? Because not all the time, as a matter of fact, I would say many systems that have been created before are not always fair. So what I would say is that we create a process to be able to have, you know, following on your lead, I like the ideas that you bring with your proposal. Consider those as well as the process, putting it together as to how we put out a call to the community. And then how do we make sure that geography is well represented, but also diversity of thought and diversity of needs in terms of transit, transportation, and mobility for the communities. And so I think that this is a good initial discussion. I think that we should all bring our ideas as to how we select the additional CAC members. But I really actually think that the voice of the chair, vice chair of the CAC should be part of who is selected. And then of course, the chair and vice chair of the RTA. And then at the end of the day, you know, everything has to come through us. And then this particular board has to make those decisions. So good initial discussion. I would love to be able to put on the table for consideration the process of how we will, we would choose these additional representatives and then take it from there.
Mr. Chair, the only thing I have concern about is some of the categories that you listed. I think I need Thomas to weigh in, but I think that's illegal to be putting out some of those categories by race or gender or those types of things. Thomas, could you weigh in on that? I just it gave me some
Mr. Chairman,
concern.
members of the board, I did, there was one of my opinions went out that I talked about, you can't sit down and select people based upon immutable characteristics. You can't say, okay, we're gonna take this person, if this person is this gender, or, all of that, it's, you're not allowed to do it. It doesn't mean you can't encourage diversity and you can't reach out to everybody. That's not what it means. It just means you can't say, I'm choosing you because of your, this status that you have. If it fits into one of the Title VII things, you can't, choose people on that basis. You can't line them up and do it that way. Or you can't replace them and say, well, you're not the right type of person. We're going to replace you with the person that has this characteristic. That's right. It's just tricky. It's something, but diversity is it's the goal is fine. You just have to make sure you do it.
Right. That's why I brought that point.
To start all over again, it's good. And you guys bring fresh new ideas. But we have an existing list. Why not contact some of those people that weren't selected and see if they're still interested? That's what I would do. And then I would open it up if you don't get anybody on there, and then figure out who else is interested. The hardest thing, because I was in the last selection, we didn't choose whether it was a girl, a guy, they were a youth or somebody older. We just looked at these people are interested to come and serve. And once we talked to them, some of them did say, yeah, we would love to join that and be part of that. And I think the biggest thing for us was we didn't choose, are there two from Arana, one from over here? One. We didn't. It was just who can make it and commit. But we do have an existing list. I got a copy of that, to be honest with you. And when I looked at the list, I didn't know any of them. And that's good, because I can't influence those people to vote for things that I want. And I think that's what we have to look at as a board, the RTA board. How fair is it? You guys decide how fair it is. Most of the time, I'd rather not know that person. Like you said, you didn't even know who it was. And if they're doing and voting their conscience and they're doing their job on this board, then we've done a good job in selecting people that are committed to take that on. And like I said, we have an existing list. I don't know if any of those people contacted to say there's another round. Are you still interested? Then the second thing would be to open it up and then figure out the hardest thing. And I told everybody over there where I work at, the hardest thing about your job here is coming to work. Try to get there every day. Try to commit, try to do the best job you can. That's the hardest thing. Everything else, we might get all kinds of people mad at us. You might not get a pat in the back, but once a month, once a year. But your conscience is what guides you. And I think that's the kind of person I would like serving, whether it's on RTA board, PAC board, or the CAC, to see if they can work for all of us, not just their jurisdiction. So if we can do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, if I may. I'm sorry, would you like to go ahead first?
I had a question. So Supervisor Scott, did you provide the geographic allocation of that there were 11, City of Tucson, 7? Did you do that research yourself?
No, if I may, Mr. Chairman, we got that data, Mr. Winfield, Mayor Winfield, at the last meeting.
Okay, we received that at the
from
last
the
meeting?
staff.
I'm sorry, you're talking about the remaining 23?
Right.
Yes, so that information, if you recall.
Don't.
Try
to give you an out.
I'll try to be brief. If you recall at the retreat, we discussed the same topic.
Yeah, right.
And
I do
then-
remember that.
And then we went out to all the CAC members. We put an invitation out to all the CAC members and requested for them to provide that information for us. assuming somebody had moved or anything along those lines. So that information came back from the remaining 23, where they live, where they work, and they're interested to continue. And that was on the agenda at the last meeting. So we have the breakdown of where they live and where they work. And then that's where Supervisor Scott looked at the remaining 23 and then made his recommendation based on how to fill the gaps.
So of the original 35, do we know the composition of that? I know there were 3 in Coral
Geographic, yes.
Valley, and now General Maxwell's explained why there's 2.
Exactly, because the geographic breakdown for the original 35, we have that as well. And it's pretty close to what's being proposed. Even at the time, like Chairman Jacopicio mentioned, that was something that came after the fact. So after the fact, after a selection was made, we asked them, okay, let's see where you live. Let's see where you work. Let's look at some of these other issues even afterwards. After the selection was made, we even asked for their volunteer information on their age, gender, and all that information. You can do that after a selection is made, not prior to a selection.
Sure.
So we have all that information.
So I guess that answers part of my suspicion, that is, if you just went through the application process, just given the population distribution in our region, the majority are likely to come from the areas where there's the highest population.
Exactly.
And so I think it has merit, but my suspicion is that we just went out for
Another call.
another call, that you would end up to a large extent where you're trying to end up.
Well, allow me to maybe help the conversation. So going back to Chairman Jacopicio's comment, we did engage the remaining roughly 17, 18 members who did not get selected. We actually invited them to come to several meetings and kind of form the ambassador group. There was a handful of them that were very engaged and interested to continue. So kind of back to what both suggestions are, we can reach out to them and ask them to apply again if that's what we decide to do. Hopefully there's going to be a few of them that are willing to do that. And then also, as far as the selection process, the current RTA rules allow the RTA executive committee to kind of have that conversation. If you want to have the executive committee have that conversation, we can do that. Or based on whatever direction you provide today, we'll be able to proceed. But again, I think the process last time, as you can see, was open and transparent, and we had great people, and General Maxwell can tell you, we have very engaged and interested people on that committee. Even the original 35 and the remaining 23 are the ones that are very engaged.
Maybe just quickly, and I have a mild concern because our original Citizens Advisory Committee, that sunsetted. We have extended that, and I'm just mildly concerned that if we, how much of a discussion are we going to have before filling those vacant positions? It would seem to me that we would want to fill those sooner than later. And I appreciate all the interests that are being expressed here, and I share those interests. Again, I think the geographic has merit. I want to see diversity and so on and so forth. I think to a certain extent, it's incumbent upon us as we do that outreach that we can reach out to individuals that we encourage them to apply, for example. Anyway.
Mayor?
I appreciate your comments, Mayor Winfield. And General is what I will call you, General Maxwell. I appreciate the dialogue. Again, I appreciate the ideas put on paper. I like the ideas. I don't think we're ready for a vote on them, but I would appreciate the opportunity to also put on paper some ideas so that we can have a good process. And I would say that chair, vice chair of RTA, chair, vice chair of CAC could help us, if we do put, which I would suggest we do, issue an open application to fill the remaining vacancies. And I agree with you that the jurisdictions should encourage those in your communities to apply for the possibility of being selected to the seats in the CAC. I understand your memo talking about diversity, race, ethnicity, gender, that it would be illegal to remove those that were appointed based on gender and ethnicity. But as we move into the new process, people can supply that information voluntarily, where they live, gender, what the interest in terms of thought, right? Interest, what is your, area of interest with regard to transit, mobility, what's your area of interest? Pedestrian, how do you travel to work? Do you use transit? Are you a pedestrian? Are you a bicyclist? And having that diversity of thought at the table really, could make someone that drives everywhere kind of see in the eyes of someone that has to take transit everywhere. And so I think that that is an important area of interest that people can supply voluntarily that will help those that are making the final recommendation to all of us really bring that additional diversity in the gaps that we might have in the CAC right now. So I would suggest that I want to put some ideas into papers so that they could be shared with the rest of the board, so that when we come back and have a thorough discussion and hopefully make decisions on this, we could say, let's move forward with X, Y, and Z, and this is how we're going to do it.
That's address it with myself. I think if we just look at the geographical distribution right now, I think we're way off. At least from the maps that we saw that you sent out. There's probably, well, if I recall right, I don't think there was only one person that had been selected that was south of Broadway, somewhere in there. So I'd probably leave like, let's say it's Tucson, I think that would be leaving out 3, maybe 4 wards. And I think you had the one person, right?
But we love South Tucson.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge disproportionate, disproportionality. If you want to go by geographic distribution, it doesn't work by itself. There are other ways that I think that you could achieve that. Maybe because when you're skipping entire words like that, any of those words is much bigger than any of the other cities, municipalities, towns, even. And we need to reconsider that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's important for me to hear from people like Mayor Honey and the chairman who were part of the 2006 effort and what worked then. The basis for my proposal was compromise. And because honestly, since I have joined this body a little over 7 months ago, what I have been hearing has been the battle between regionalism and localism. And so this proposal was an attempt to try and settle the dispute between those two mindsets. I certainly am not so wedded to it that it has to be approved as it is conceived. But the main reason that I put it forward is that we need to get moving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We need to get going because the current plan expires in 2026, and it's conceivable that we will have to go to the voters more than once. That's possible. So we need to get moving. And that was the main reason that I wanted to put forth some kind of compromise. At the very least, I'm glad that it has started some dialogue so that we can get moving. But one thing that we really haven't talked about, although I think Mr. DeGroot is going to talk about it, is reaffirming this framework. Because if we look at everything that the CAC adopted in January 2020 to guide their work, it's also a reassurance to every jurisdiction that their concerns are going to be addressed equally with every other jurisdiction. And it's also a reassurance to the voters that we are looking at all of the potential transportation needs between 2026 and 2046. So if there is still time, and I don't want to cut off anybody else's comments, I would love to hear the presentation that Mr. DeGroot was going to make about the framework.
He forgot it.
By now.
It is a little long, but that's up to you, but we'll try to keep it brief.
He was great at brevity at the retreats.
There you go.
Well, we'll see if I can find.
But we had
some-
5 hours that day.
We need a 5-hour meeting.
Mr. Sheriff, if you're good with that, I'll move forward with this. We did have 10 transportation goals that were identified by the CAC in their guiding principles and goals. Back in April, when we had our retreat, we talked a little bit about what the statutes enabled us to do. I'm going to go real quickly through this and just show that these goals are in alignment with the statutes. That's what the purpose of this presentation is here. And see if I can get this thing to work again. It's not working for me yet. Oh, no. Could you go ahead and advance it, please? Okay. The first 2 items that we're going to talk about are congestion, reducing congestion and providing efficient crosstown mobility. The RTA statutes permit us to identify corridors and define transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor. So that is that's in alignment. Next slide, please. We have a transportation goal of improving transit ridership, and the statutes permit us to basically acquire public transportation systems as we deem necessary, and gives priority to high population corridors. Next. We have transportation goals associated with reducing crashes in intersections and reducing wildlife-related crashes. Again, the identifying corridors and their specific problems and needs. And we have the ability to determine environmental, economic, energy, and social policies to guide our transportation investment decisions. Next, please. We have a transportation goal of improving the conditions of our existing roadways. Again, in fact, the one identifying corridors and defining the transportation problems, goals, and needs for each corridor. You're going to hear that a couple more times, so I'll just say ditto on that. But we also have the ability to determine the need for landscape buffers, noise barriers, pedestrian bypasses, multi-use paths, and other environmental measures relating to the regional transportation plan, which can definitely improve the conditions of roadways. Transportation or providing safer bicycle pedestrian facilities. Again, that ability to address those noise barriers, pedestrian bypasses, multi-use paths and such, that's definitely explicitly permitted, as is the ability to determine the mix of alternative transportation modes appropriate for each corridor. So that is consistent. Maintaining or improving air quality. Again, we do have the ability to specifically determine the impact of the plan on air quality, with one of those goals being the improved air quality. That's explicitly in the enabling legislation. Improving access to workplaces. In addition to identifying the corridor problems, goals, and needs, we also have the ability to determine environmental, economic, energy, and social policies to guide our investment decisions. And the last of the goals is to add functionality to key corridors. Again, I think that captures many of these that you've already seen here in terms of the specific passages within the enabling legislation. And finally, as we go forward with and we begin to do our plan development, we'll also need to look at the RTA administrative code that was adopted. We'll need to update that. We'll need to update and amend the new projects, elements, and guidance for implementation to this, the document. And we will also have to look at renewing or revisiting and amending our administrative code and procedures, objectives, and policies. That concludes my presentation.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, so the main reason for that was to kind of highlight that there is a good foundation. And again, I'll rely on General Maxwell to maybe add a few comments about how passionate the committee was when they formed these guidelines. I think it's a really good starting point, and we hope that if they continue along those lines, that they can continue to use this guideline to proceed.
And Mr. Chair, just to add to the executive director's comments, is that all you have to do is attend one of these CAC meetings. You're going to find out not only how passionate they are, and we've got diverse opinions about what should go in and around the table already. But I think it's but they got it right. Afterwards I leaned over and said, man, those CAC folks were good because everything's authorized under the statute. So they were well within it. That's why I would strongly encourage us, and I agree, we've got to move. And that's the nice part about having this meeting out of cycle in August, and we've got one coming up in September again. I believe we can do that. But I would definitely really strongly encourage bringing the CAC chair and vice chairs into the conversation about what, if you were able to fill around the table to be most efficient and effective, getting a plan that is going to both pass muster with the citizens, but also with the board and with, more important, the municipalities. When you each have concerns in your municipalities of what you need from this plan and as part of your individual plans going forward, as well as the regional approach that we take. So, but I think we've got an real rare opportunity here, kind of partway through the stream of this Citizens Advisory Committee, to fill it in and make it even that much stronger going forward. So.
And if I may, and I understand, yes, of course, we absolutely have to move forward. And I really appreciate, Supervisor Scott, you're trying to find answers and solutions. That's solutions-oriented individuals are exactly what we need at this table. So I really appreciate that. Even though there's urgency, we also have to be conscious about being, being careful and prudent of how we proceed, because this is an important step. And we do have until 2026, even though I am not saying we should wait till the last minute. We do have time to do this right and to proceed with caution and proceed in a way that all of the jurisdictions feel well represented and ready to go with a plan that everyone can say, yes, we fully 100% support this plan if there is going to be an RTA next. So, I think that there are some elements that were not discussed in this particular framework of goals. Some are like, technology, climate resiliency, focus on pedestrians, bikes, and complete streets. Those are things that we have heard from our Move Tucson plan that had extensive participation and engagement from residents of the city of Tucson. So yes, let's move fast as we can, but being very prudent and conscious of making good, appropriate decisions for our region, because it's consequential. They're consequential decisions that we make. So appreciate it.
I'd like to add one more thing. I know that I was looking at, again, going back to the map and the list of people's names on that we had, that Excel spreadsheet. I took those names and I stuck them into the internet, and see what would turn, And a lot of those people were either working for the government or they were business people for the most part. I don't think I saw any what I would consider maybe your typical day-to-day worker who travels from here to there, goes across to the other side of town to get for their job, comes back home. No, most of them were business people, and I can understand that. But the thing is, and then you see that committee perhaps may be more guided by economic development than anything else. That me, it's not representative of maybe the occupation occupations that people have in the city or in the area. It just does not seem to me like a very well-structured committee in terms of who they represent, who they are, what their what their abilities are. I mean, not that we want to select people on that basis, but it's just not representative of the entire county.
What is the next step in this, in regards to this topic?
Where do we go from here? We got.
If I may again, Mr.
If
Chair.
I may, Mr. Chair. What I would recommend is that Supervisor Scott put his ideas. I like your ideas. I really do. I think that the process on how we put out for a call for community to apply, and that should be done, soon. And we should ask, we should ask those voluntary questions that might add that diversity that I think we seek, right? Diversity of thought and areas of our community that are not represented currently in the CAC. So I can put some ideas in writing and submit to my colleagues on the RTA board, and then we can come back ready to make decisions in the September meeting based on, a combination of what has been suggested, and get to a point where we all feel comfortable making taking a step forward. For now, I think that the conversation still needs to mature, and then add some ideas, as I think everyone and anyone on this board should submit their ideas to the rest of us and come back ready to make decisions in September so that we can start moving in a good pace, so that the CAC can continue their work with the new voices.
Mr. Chair, the only cautionary tale I think on that is I would suggest that you submit it to staff to submit back to us, because if you start emailing all of us and then we email you back, I think we get ourselves in trouble. So that's how I do it in the town. I just submit it to the town manager and then he submits it out to everybody so we don't get in trouble.
Mr. Timeline. When do we expect to send out the call? And is it 30 days or we're gonna wait 2 weeks? That works for me. We need to figure out, is it gonna be open like that and see how many submissions we get? If it doesn't get enough, then are you gonna extend it? And those are the things I worry about when we do things like that.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may again, the current executive committee rule has that authority to help formalize some of these suggestions. If you want to utilize the executive committee to do that and then bring that information back to you, obviously we can have the executive committee come back with a recommendation. That would be my recommendation.
You need to make a motion on that?
If your pleasure, again, I mean, we do have a good variety of opinions here, and I assume that the executive committee can come back with a recommendation with this information and hopefully try to gel it into something that would meet everybody's intent. That would be helpful.
I make the motion, send out the call or send out notice that we need members. PAC,
With a timeline on it,
what do you need? 30 days?
I would think, I mean, before if we want to try and get it in by September or something within the next month.
Chairman, Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
Mr. Chairman. If we may, before we do the call out, I think it would be important to have the process sewn up. And, you know, I would be more than happy and put in writing and submit within the next week what I'm trying to propose to use as a process so that it could be married with some of the concepts that Supervisor Scott used. So that could happen immediately. And after that happens, maybe the chair and vice chair of the RTA board and the chair and vice chair of the CAC, as General Maxwell suggested, that their voices be included in the decision-making about how we move forward. That could happen within the next, 2 to 3 weeks, so that we can pull that call out for the new members.
Everybody okay with that in the,
Mr. Chairman, Mayor, I agree. I think so that, we've been talking, we got to rush, we got to keep moving. We do have to keep moving, but here's the reality of the CAC. And I've spoken with both the city manager, the Tucson city manager, as well as the Tucson DOT in my role, both at SLC and talking about infrastructure. And they know that the urgency for the city's projects. If you take a look at the projects that are lined up in Move Tucson, you see the way they're divided by different categories. It becomes obvious when you look at it what projects are really something that could go into the RTA. But that list, the Citizens Advisory Committee, and when we need it, we need the folks appointed to it and kind of caught up to speed. Really, the work will begin when that list is then turned in, because now they're going to have the ability to go over projects. They're going to have the ability to start discussing, how much of it's going to go towards, projects versus transit versus some of the other issues they're going to have to delve in. So I think getting it right is correct. I do think putting out and giving somebody at least 30 days, because the hardest part's going to be everybody around this table going out and telling people in their communities that, hey, there's more openings on the, and I'm sure you all are well aware of who your transit or your infrastructure or your folks who might be engaged in, maybe would be good selection. So to get them to, that's really part of the problem. I mean, it kind of disappointed me that there was only 17 people that weren't selected for that first one, because that doesn't mean there was all that many volunteers. So I agree, we don't want to lose those 17 and we want to gain some possibility to it. But timing wise, yes, we're in a hurry. 30 days is minimum when you put out those kind of things. I don't think you're going to get a good turnout if it's any tighter than that. And then, you've got to have a little bit of spin up. And then when the project lists are all there and it's time to go, it's going to be depending how fast the Citizens Advisory Committee can move with the TMC's advice on when we will actually start to be able to talk about those things. So it's 23 the year, 24 the year, 22, definitely not 25 and 26. That'd be my position right now. For that late, we are late to the game. I'm already concerned that Maricopa is playing a really dangerous game up north because they're pushing up against their deadline, and I don't want to see us do that.
So, Mr. Chair, just to add to the chairman's suggestion, I don't think we need a motion, but you tell me to have I'll submit my ideas, kind of like what Supervisor Scott did, and then within the next 2 to 3 weeks, maybe the chair, vice chair. Sorry, I'm giving you work to do. Chair and vice chair of the RTA board and the chair and vice chair of the CAC gather and decide on the process, what type of information we want to know from those applicants, and then put out the call for at least 30 days. That's what I would suggest the next move is.
Modify his motion.
well, I would say retract my motion.
Your motion, right.
Until this is done then. So if everybody's okay waiting those 2 weeks on Mayor Regina Romero's recommendation and Mr. Scott's. And then I guess the executive would look at that, and then once they reported back to you, would fulfill that, and then set the motion. And
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Chairman Iacopicio, just want to be clear. Are you suggesting to send that out before the full board suggests the process, or bring it back to the full board before we put
the
it out?
issue then becomes how much is it going to change or not change on the structure and whatever. That's really the issue. Can we get a list? And then once they get here, this is a structure before you select.
So at the pleasure of the board, I would recommend utilizing your executive committee, RTA executive committee. That's an existing committee. And then they would make the recommendation, put the call out, and then obviously the recommendation and the full selection comes back to the full
Mr.
board.
Chair, that is not my suggestion. If you'd like a motion, I'd like to move that the chair and vice chair of the CAC and the chair and vice chair of the RTA board sit down and come up with a process of an application process so that we can start the process of seeking the additional members to the CAC. And anyone on this board is more than welcome to submit their ideas. But I would like to make that in the form of a motion so that it could be, we could have the voices of the CAC as part of moving forward. And
Sure. I actually made a motion. So we either have to put that one down first and then go on this one. So you can't do those things like that, not in my neck of the woods. So I would have to find from the board, do I retract my motion and go with this one? Or because my motion was simply to get out.
Just put out the call.
put out the
That's
call.
it. Yeah. All the other intricacies that you're gonna do are part of what you want and the gentleman over there wants and our concerns as a board. But that could be done while we're getting that list together. Everybody's concerned with time. The best thing you can do is send out the word to see who is interested. And that was my motion, just to simply do that. All the inner workings of the structure and what's the expectations are, I think we can still work on those while we gather a list. My motion was simply a list.
So, Mr. Chairman, why don't you call, we shouldn't have had two motions on the floor. The point's well taken. We should call for whether there's a second on the first motion first, and then see if there's an alternate. That would be the right procedurally right.
All right.
I'll second the first motion.
Have a second. Okay. Have any further discussion? Can we have a roll call?
May I add further discussion?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the only reason that I'm suggesting that we wait to put the call out for people is because they're, in my view, we should make an effort to include voluntary demographic information on what their interests. So the way that people would apply the application itself should ask particular questions. I would more than happy go with your motion so that we could put out the call, but the process of putting that questionnaire together there's still some questions in my mind as to what we ask people when they're applying. That's the only concern that I have with your motion.
Mr. Chair, the last time, what did the application look like? Is that a concern, or are we gonna?
Yeah, so obviously we want to make sure it's in compliance with Title VI. So we cannot request for that information. It was more of a essay type of tell us a little bit about who you are, how you get around, what modes of transportation you utilize, what interests do you have. So it was good background information to understand the diversity of the interest from individuals. So I assume Chairman Iacopicio is suggesting to use the same call out. I wouldn't create a new call out if the motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, you can ask demographic information if it's voluntary.
Not if it's part of a selection process. After they're selected, we could.
I believe that that is not absolutely accurate. You can ask for voluntary information. Mayor and council does this in committees all the time, and we receive federal funds and state funds. We're not violating anything if we ask for geographic, demographic information on a voluntary basis.
Gonna
Mr.
rely on our
Benavides.
attorney.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I can't give you a hard answer on that. It's a matter of, risk taking in your process and what your goals are. So it's not per se illegal, but my opinion on certain types of activity, but there's just a lot of different things. I can't give you a hard answer on that. It's just generally when you're making selections, you don't want that information. Therefore, you can't be accused of making selections based on criteria that aren't appropriate or legal. So once you have that information, you can't say, well, I didn't know. That's why, like in hiring, you make sure you never ask certain
Right.
questions, you never gather certain information, and you never let this decision maker see certain information, because then it's just too easy to tee up a complaint.
But we can ask for geographic information and
absolutely.
certain demographic
Yeah, I mean,
information.
of course, because that's totally rational.
Okay, because that the putting out the call, as the chairman has suggested, the application process is important, and I will be more than happy to support your motion, Chairman. But it depends on how that application is. So if you can accept the just a friendly amendment to include necessary information for us to be able to,
For me?
or not for us, but for the selection committee to.
For me, even going through a few of these, still don't want to know where they live. I just want to know how they're gonna serve. And, and like you said, Mr. Chairman, we didn't get anybody from Broadway that way. And maybe we don't judge them whether they go on the east side of Broadway, east, north, anything. We just bring people, like I said. That's simply what my motion is, to get a variety of people and see from there who's interested. My motion is simply to formulate a list to see if that'll get us going and to see if this board is satisfied with that list. I did not want to ask them, I remember that, how do you drive to work? Do you walk to work? Do you bike to work? That kind of stuff. Right, sir? You're familiar with that, sir. And to me, that was just as important as to where do they live. And for me, the motion that I made, not a suggestion, was basically to formulate a list and get the word out there that who wants to serve on the CAC. All the other intricacies that you're asking for, Madam Mayor and everybody else, we can specify those once you get those to the executive board, and then we get into the full RTA board as to what are you looking for and the selection.
Mr. Chair, I would just let the chairman know I'll be supporting it as it exists.
Mr. Chairman, I asked for the question and a roll call, please.
Mr. Chair, I just take your motion first.
We have Mr. Beasl's motion. Did we have a second on it?
Yeah, no, second.
And if there's no further discussion on that, we have roll call.
Aye.
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 No.
I'm not sure.
Unfortunately, he had to leave.
Have to disconnect.
Carries.
Mr. Chair? One of the reasons I'd like to explain my vote. I voted yes, because I think we do need to get this started. Now, the process hasn't been decided on how we're doing it. So whether we collect these names and then use them is still to be determined as we decide. I think it's gonna be important to get the CAC in there. It's putting out for a list of creating, finding who's interested, is no different than putting out for a job opening. You can put out for a job opening, collect all the names and then never conduct an interview. There's no requirement. So I think the language in it is to put out there. You can, I would recommend being real cautious about what you're putting about. There's 12 vacancies. We're looking for people to serve. Are you interested? That becomes our list of interested personnel. And then at that point, as we talk to the CAC chair, and talk to others, and talk amongst ourselves more, and we determine how it is we want to fill those seats. Now we've already got a list, so we're not delayed. Wait, now asking the question. So, Chairman, that's.
That was simply it that I was saying.
Mr. Chair? And in the motion of who helps us form the, the core group in terms of who helps decide on what recommendations are made to the entire board.
Right.
I would like to move that we have the chair and the vice chair of the RTA and the chair and the vice chair of the CAC help us with the process. That's pretty much my motion. Help us with the process and move in a timely fashion. So that's what I'd like to make as a motion.
Second.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, Executive Director, but you may get me. I believe there might be 2 vice chairs. At one point, I believe there was a co-chair and 2 vice chairs. So it just.
I'm the CAC. Yes, I'm the CAC. So again, if I may, and I'm going to rely on
Vice
Thomas.
chairs at the RTA.
I'm going to rely on Thomas. So we have an existing committee. This would form a new committee, correct?
Well, I can't quite tell from the motion whether it would or not. If you're just asking for their input, I don't think you're creating a committee. But I mean, if you're saying we want this group of people to review this and report back to the board, you're, essentially forming a committee, or you could be, because you're going to do it by, when you do it by motion and vote, that generally forms a committee. So just be aware of that, then if that group gets saddled with the open meeting process.
Is it okay to have that motion based on what the agenda item was?
Oh, yeah, I don't have there was a lot of material. I mean, there was attachments in the packet. There's public notice for our
Okay,
discussion.
I just
and our
wanted to
action.
hear
It's a
what it
good
was about.
question. No, I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, could we just get clarification if the intent to establish a committee or just input?
No,
encourage
I
conversation? You
would
don't want to
say
establish a
similar to not establishing a committee, Mr. McGinty.
No, thank you. I just want to clarify that.
Just a working group, which Mr. Benavides, you said that a working group would be fine. There's no quorum issues there.
So if that's
would-
the case, I would
Yeah.
recommend that I don't need a motion. We just need to reach out and get input and bring it back as a staff recommendation with their input. Otherwise, we're forming a committee.
That's how I took it as a working group.
Yeah.
Not a little board.
So it would be a staff recommendation based on their input.
But you have a motion.
How do we clear the
So you have a
table?
motion and a second, so.
Oh, was there a second? I didn't hear.
There was a
Yeah, I
motion
second
and
that,
a
'cause I-
second. And this would be a working group. So I would rather have a vote.
For the working group.
Well, like a working group, and a committee, that's just playing with words. I mean, are we forming a group or are we getting input from these individuals? Because that's the key. I mean, the law, are you forming an advisory body to this body? Because that triggers the open meeting law. That's the issue. Are we doing that? You can do that. It just means you need to make sure that you do the posted agenda and you take minutes and all that good stuff.
And I don't have a problem with working in public when there's discussions about filling the CAC. I mean, I don't know if you all have a problem with having an open discussion, whoever wants to show up and listen to how this is being formed. I just think it's important that we do things in a transparent way. So I don't have an issue with having a working group or advisory group to help us select.
Sometimes it's just the time, and then you got to get a quorum together, or you can't do anything if you don't have everybody together. Then you can't
Can't
formally interact because there's so few people. You've always got a quorum, so it just gets tricky. That's all. But it's not something that can't be done.
Who exactly would be in this working group?
The chair.
Chair and the vice chair of
vice chair of
RTA and
RTA,
CAC,
The chair and the vice chair of the CAC.
and that's it?
Yeah, so that they could help us select and
Help
give
the entire
the entire board.
board.
And we were worried that it might be more than one vice chair though. 'Cause I don't know
There are
the-
two
there are
vice
two
chairs. There are
vice
two
chairs.
vice
So
chairs.
There are.
that creates
I
a,
would, if I'm the vice chair, I will opt out and leave it to the other vice chair.
On the CAC side.
But to that point, if there's 1, 2, 3, 5 people, if you're missing, I guess you could have it if you had 3 people, right? You need to have 3 of those
Yeah, 3, you're
5
good.
For quorum.
for quorum.
Quorum.
As opposed to if only some, it's up to everybody else, but
Mr. Chair, and this is, and I apologize for my not understanding how the process will work if we form it as a committee. But you said at that point, we get into open meeting laws, but do we also get into notifications, announcements?
Yep.
So my fear, if we make it official, because I fully agree, there's nothing to hide. There shouldn't be anything to hide behind these discussions. It should be open, transparent. My fear is now we're talking a significantly time increase to one, but notice, have a meeting, have public interest. Getting the public there. That's the only concern, like I said, that if we make it an official committee of this, because when's our September's meeting scheduled?
I believe it's 23rd.
So I guess we got 5, 6 weeks, so it may work. I just got a little concerned with the time constraints.
Usually you need 24 hours to,
that's the right.
To
Mr.
notice.
Chair, I remember the word, that's the legal minimum is
Right.
24 hours. You're supposed, the law says you're supposed to do as much as possible under circumstances, but the bare minimum is 24 hours.
24 hours.
my concern with that would be from the past is that looks non-transparent. When you go put something out with 24-hour notice, then who's going to show up? So that's.
Ready, would we call for a vote?
Okay. Call for a vote.
For the committee?
Yeah, for the working group. For
The working group.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
They're the same, they really are. They're sorry, they're the same. I think we're creating a committee, just so you know.
Do we
So
need a
we're gonna-
vote though?
Not if we did it just as it is without a vote and have staff take care of
If
it.
you do it with a vote and, then that's, the statute says that's what.
But
forms
what
a
if
committee.
staff would recommend, and we don't have a vote? What I want to make sure is that the CAC representation is part of the conversation. That's what I want to make sure that happens. And I'm not too trusty right now in terms of that happening. So, Mr. Benavides, I could withdraw my motion, but I want to make sure that the CAC is helping us make the recommendations with the chair and vice chair in the same room.
Mr. Chair, I guess as the
It's
new-
cl- I mean, I
as the new-
understand what you're saying.
Okay.
as the new member, since I do not understand and do not know, when we direct staff to do something, is that effectively a mandate that they need to do it? Because so
Yes,
if we
I'm
direct, if we direct staff to include CAC and in those conversations to get the criteria, that's effectively ensuring that they will be involved in the conversation.
Right, that's our corporate structure work. That's what that would be. If you direct staff is supposed to do that and staff will do that, I mean, if you appoint a bunch of people to do something, then you're forming an advisory body and that's different. When you direct staff to do something, staff can work amongst staff to get it done.
Administrative is the directive to the staff.
Yes, it would be an administrative directive. to
So-
Can we
staff.
go that way?
So then I'll withdraw my motion, but I want to make sure that the direction to staff is that the chair and vice chair of the RTA board and the chair and vice chairs of the CAC are part of helping choose and the discussion of how to put together the process of selecting our additional CAC board members.
So, Mr. Chair, Mayor Romero, so that recommendation comes back to the full board. And then at that time, the full board can act on the recommendation.
So it will happen. And then it's going to come back to us.
You're
for the
saying
final
that
approval.
what Mayor Romero just suggested is an acceptable direction.
Yes,
to the
of course.
staff, and then
Of course, I just want to
achieve what-
be clear that my recommendation is have the full board approve the process before we implement the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll withdraw my motion. Thank you for the second, Chairman Yukupisu. As long as that happens, I'm more than happy in terms of giving direction.
And then the original motion, if I may, the original motion was go ahead and put out the call in the meantime.
And
And
then
yes, of
that's-
course, we'll do that.
Yeah, I think this puts the two together now.
Yes.
And then
Then the process.
also on this one right here, on your administrative directive timeline.
Ideally, if you want to have this conversation at the September meeting, we'll have it out a week before in your packet. It'll be a recommendation from those 5 individuals.
Thank you.
Okay. Say Dewey in our language.
Read that again. What is it? Dewey?
Dewey.
I'm gonna remember that.
You say orale. Alrighty.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chair, it's at your pleasure, given if you like, we can give you this presentation. If not, we can do it again at the September meeting. Typically at the September meeting, we do a amendment to the RTA budget. So we could do this at that time, given the fact that that's already complete.
I'm a half hour late for my next meeting. So read it.
Are we having dinner?
I'm all right with that. It's gonna go another half hour.
My call was about my dinner.
So that's not an action item. It was just for information. So we'll do it in September. if That's okay.
We'll pass to number 5 now. Number 6 is adjournment. Your turn.
So moved. So we are.
So second, right? We need a second.
Everybody say aye.
I think they need that.
And the nays, you can station.
Okay, we lost him.
Yeah,
Supervisor
yes.
Scott had to leave.
I'm out of here.
Officially over.